My name is Ethan Reed. I'm 26 years old, and my story doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with the heavy, suffocating silence that comes right before the storm. I knew something was wrong the moment I put my key in the lock. There was a tension in the air, a stillness that felt different from the usual quiet of a weekday afternoon. The key turned. The lock clicked. And as the door swung open, I saw her. My mother, Karen Reed, was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, face set like granite. It was the expression she wore when she had been building a case against me in her head, letting grievances simmer until they were ready to boil over. There was no greeting. No. How was your day? Just the cold, accusatory stare that had become the backdrop of my life. My father, Thomas Reed, was sitting in his usual armchair, a newspaper held up in front of him like a shield. I could see his knuckles, white and tight, gripping the edges of the paper. He was a master of strategic invisibility. "Where have you been?" My mother's voice was low, but sharp enough to cut glass. I closed the door softly behind me. "Just out looking for work." Dropped off a few more applications. It was the truth. But I knew the truth didn't matter. The verdict had already been decided. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Looking for work. Is that what you call it? Wandering around all day? Wasting time? Coming back here to eat my food and live under my roof for free? I pay for my own groceries." "Mom," I said, my voice even. I refused to give her the fight she was craving. "And I help with the utilities when I can." "When you can?" She shot back, taking a step forward. "That's not enough. It's never enough. Your brother has a family to support. Your sister is building a life for herself. And you? What do you do? Ethan, you do nothing. You are a leech. A 6-year-old leech attached to this family, sucking the life out of us." The word hung in the air. Leech? It wasn't the first time she'd used it, but this time it felt different. It felt final. Before I could respond, she spun around, grabbed the worn-out black duffel bag I kept by the door, and hurled it onto the porch with a grunt. It landed with a dull thud, the zipper splitting open slightly. My few belongings, a couple of changes of clothes, a laptop, a dog-eared book, were now on the outside of the house that was supposed to be my home. "Get out!" she screamed, her face red, her voice cracking with a rage that seemed to have been stored up for years. "I want you out of my house. I can't stand to look at you for another second." My eyes flicked to my father. The newspaper didn't move. Not a rustle. Not a twitch. He was there, but he wasn't. He had chosen his side through silence, a decision he'd been making for my entire life. Something inside me, a string that had been stretched taut for years, finally snapped. But it didn't make a sound. There was no anger, no shouting, no pleading. There was just a sudden, hollow calm. I looked at my mother's furious face, at the static figure of my father behind his paper shield, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of release. I turned without a word, stepped out onto the porch, and knelt to zip up my duffel bag. My hands were steady. I picked it up, the strap settling into its familiar groove on my shoulder. I didn't look back. I didn't slam the door. I just walked down the concrete steps, onto the driveway, and away from the only home I had ever known. The silence that followed me down the street was louder than all her screaming. That word, Leech, echoed in my head as I walked. It was a carefully chosen weapon designed to inflict maximum damage by twisting the truth into a grotesque caricature. My mother was a master of that. She could take a situation and hold it up to a distorted mirror, showing you a monster where a person used to be. The reality of my life was so much grayer, so much quieter than the black and white failure she painted. I wasn't a freeloader. I was a son who had tried and failed and tried again in a world that didn't seem to have a place for me. I graduated from college with a degree in communications and a mountain of student debt, right as the economy took a nosedive. The promising internships and entry-level jobs that had been dangled in front of my graduating class vanished like smoke. My first job, a junior marketing position I'd been ecstatic to land, lasted 6 months before the company downsized. I was one of 20 people let go in a single afternoon, a casualty of a bad quarter. I came home that day with a cardboard box of my belongings, and my mother's first words were, "What did you do wrong?" There was no comfort, no reassurance. In her mind, failure was always a personal flaw, never a circumstance. My father just grunted and said, "Well, you'd better start looking for something else tomorrow." And I did. I spent my days scouring job boards, tailoring my resume, writing cover letters until my fingers ached. I took a job at a call center, a soul-crushing gig where I was yelled at for 8 hours a day by strangers. I lasted 4 months before another round of layoffs hit. The company was outsourcing its support department. Again, I was handed a box and a final paycheck. This time, I didn't even bother telling my mother the details. I just said the job ended. She rolled her eyes as if I had simply decided to stop going. After that, the path became rockier. I did freelance writing for pennies, delivered pizzas, and worked temp jobs in warehouses, lifting heavy boxes until my back screamed. I took a job with a local landscaping crew, mowing lawns and laying mulch under the hot summer sun. The work was honest and hard, but to my mother, it was shameful. "A college degree to cut grass," she'd say with a sneer to one of her friends on the phone, just loud enough for me to hear from the next room. Through it all, I contributed. When I had a steady paycheck, I gave my parents a few hundred a month for rent. When I was between jobs, I made sure the internet and electricity bills were paid from my dwindling savings. I always bought my own groceries. My food kept on a separate shelf in the pantry and refrigerator. A clear line drawn between what was theirs and what was mine. It was a quiet, constant effort to prove I wasn't a burden, to hold up my end of an unwritten contract. But none of it was ever seen. My contributions were invisible, but my presence was a glaring failure. The hypocrisy was the hardest part to swallow. My older brother Mark was the golden child, a charismatic salesman who could do no wrong. 2 years ago. He wrapped his new sports car around a telephone pole after having a few too many at a client dinner. He was arrested for a DUI, a charge that could have cost him his job and his license. My parents sprang into action. They drained their savings to hire the best lawyer in town. My mother called it a terrible mistake. My father said, "Boys will be boys." He's learned his lesson. Mark never paid a cent of the legal fees, never spent a night in jail, and was back to being the family hero within a month. No one ever called him a burden. My younger sister, Sophia, was the free spirit. She had moved to 4 different cities in 5 years, chasing vague dreams of becoming a photographer, a yoga instructor, a jewelry designer. Each move was funded by my parents. They paid for her plane tickets, her security deposits, and her living expenses until she found a part-time job that she would inevitably quit a few months later. Her aimlessness was framed as an exciting adventure. "She's finding herself," my mother would say with pride. "She's so brave to chase her dreams." Her lack of a stable job was never a sign of failure. It was a mark of her artistic temperament. But I was different. I stayed home. I tried to build a life in the town I grew up in. My stability was seen as stagnation. My struggle was seen as laziness. Mark's recklessness was a mistake. Sophia's instability was a dream. My practicality was a failure. They were investments. I was a liability. The day before my mother threw me out, I had come home from a job interview for an entry-level IT position. It had gone well, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of hope. I mentioned it at dinner. "I think I might have a good shot at this one," I said. My mother didn't even look up from her plate. "That's what you said last time," she muttered. My father, as usual, said nothing. But Mark, who was over for dinner, smirked. Isn't that just fixing printers all day? You should get into sales." That's where the real money is." He said it with a casual arrogance, as if it were just that easy. As if the world simply handed success to those who asked for it. I didn't have the energy to argue, to explain that his path wasn't mine, that his luck wasn't universal. I just ate in silence, the familiar weight of their disappointment settling over me. That was my crime. I realized. It wasn't that I was a leech. It was that I was a constant, unwelcome reminder that life didn't always go according to plan. And for that, I had to be cast out. My role in the family wasn't just the son who lived at home. For the better part of a decade, I had been their unpaid on-call technician, their household manager, and their bridge to the modern world. It was a job that came with no salary, no thanks, and no recognition. It was simply expected, a service rendered by the one who was always there. The irony was suffocating. They called me a leech for taking up space, but they were the ones who had been feeding on my time, my skills, and my patience for years. It started small, as these things always do. When I was in high school, I was the one who set up the family's first wireless router. My father, a man who could build a deck with his bare hands, was completely mystified by the blinking lights and tangle of cords. He'd hovered over my shoulder, grumbling about how things used to be simpler, while I navigated the setup wizard and secured the network. When the Wi-Fi suddenly worked, he just grunted, "About time," and walked away. That was my first lesson. My success wasn't an achievement. It was the restoration of the expected order. As technology evolved, so did my duties. I was the one who had to sync my mother's new iPhone to her car's Bluetooth system, a task she deemed impossible after trying for 5 minutes. I spent an hour in the garage toggling settings and rebooting devices until her podcasts finally played through the car speakers. Her reaction? Well, that took you long enough. I was the one who taught my father how to use the streaming service he desperately wanted so he could watch his old westerns. I set up his account, created his password, something simple he could remember, and bookmarked the site on his browser. Every few weeks, he'd call me in a panic. The TV is broken again." It was never broken. He had just forgotten his password or accidentally switched the TV's input. I would patiently walk him through the steps, resetting his password, selecting the correct HDMI port, until the familiar face of John Wayne filled the screen. He would never thank me. He would just settle into his armchair, his attention already captured, my presence forgotten. My responsibilities extended beyond technology. I was the family's digital administrator. I was the one who scanned and uploaded important documents, managed their online bill payments, and printed out concert tickets or boarding passes they needed. When my mother wanted to sell an old armchair on Facebook Marketplace, I was the one who had to take the pictures, write the description, and deal with the flood of lowball offers and flaky buyers. When the chair finally sold, she took the cash and said, "See, that was easy." I never asked for anything in return. I never kept a tally or demanded payment. I did it because, on some level, I believed that this was my contribution. This was how I earned my keep. If I couldn't provide a steady stream of income that impressed them, I could at least make their lives easier. I could be useful. I could be the reliable one, the fixer. I thought that by being indispensable in these small, quiet ways, they might eventually see my value. But they didn't. Instead of gratitude, my utility bred contempt. My constant availability made me seem like I had nothing better to do. My ability to solve their problems only reinforced their belief that my own problems were a result of a lack of effort. If I could fix their computer, why couldn't I fix my own life? The most painful moments were the ones where my service was completely erased. One Christmas, I spent hours setting up the new smart home system my brother Mark had bought them as a gift. He just dropped the box on the counter and said, "You're good with this stuff. You handle it." So, I did. I installed the smart speakers, configured the light bulbs, and linked everything to an app on their phones. Later that day, when my aunt came over and marveled at how they could turn on the lights with their voice, my mother beamed with pride. "Oh, it's wonderful," she said. "Mark is so thoughtful and clever. He set this all up for us." Mark, standing right there, just smiled and accepted the praise. He didn't correct her. He didn't even glance in my direction. In that moment, I wasn't just invisible. I had been completely written out of the scene. I was a ghost in my own home. A stagehand who was supposed to remain behind the curtain while the stars took their bows. I swallowed the hurt. Just as I always did. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that doing the right thing was its own reward. But it wasn't. Each unacknowledged act of service was like a small stone added to a pile I was carrying on my back. I fixed their phones, paid their bills online, updated their software, and in return, they treated me with a disdain that grew more potent with each passing year. They saw me as dead weight, never realizing that I was the one keeping their ship afloat in the digital sea. I was the quiet, humming engine in the basement that they never thought about, until the day it stopped running. The walk from my parents' house to my friend Liam's apartment was only 15 minutes, but it felt like crossing a continent. Each step was heavy, deliberate. The strap of the duffel bag dug into my shoulder, a physical reminder of the weight I had just shed. The night air was cool and crisp, a clean break from the stale, recycled anger of my mother's living room. There was no internal monologue of rage, no frantic planning. There was only the rhythmic sound of my own footsteps on the pavement and a vast, echoing emptiness inside me. Liam lived in a small second-floor apartment above a laundromat. The building was old, and the air on the stairs smelled of detergent and damp concrete. I knocked on his door, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. He opened it a moment later, a video game controller in one hand, his expression shifting from confusion to concern when he saw me. What's up? Man, he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I dropped my bag on the floor. It was the only thing I owned in the world right now. Got kicked out, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Liam didn't ask for details. He didn't pry or offer platitudes. He just looked at me, then at the bag, and nodded slowly. All right, he said. Couch is yours for as long as you need it. You hungry? That was Liam. Simple, direct, and unconditionally supportive. We had been friends since middle school, and he had seen the slow, simmering dysfunction of my family up close. He never judged. He just offered a safe harbor. In that moment, his quiet acceptance was more comforting than any words of sympathy could have been. I spent the first few days in a fog. I slept on his lumpy but comfortable couch. The sounds of the laundromat below a gentle, rhythmic hum. I woke up when I wanted, not to the sound of my mother's passive-aggressive sighing from the kitchen. I ate cereal out of a box and watched bad daytime television. Liam would go to his job at a local auto parts store, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And for the first time in my life, I felt peace. There were no eggshells to walk on. There was no need to brace myself for the inevitable criticism or disappointed glare. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for as long as I could remember began to recede. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been spending just trying to be invisible, to not set my mother off, to not be a disappointment. Here on Liam's couch, I was just me. I didn't have to be anything for anyone. But as the initial numbness wore off, something else began to surface. It wasn't sadness or self-pity. It was a cold, hard rage. It started as a small, tight knot in my chest and slowly uncoiled, spreading through me like ice. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had funneled into that house for bills, for groceries, for repairs. I thought about the decade of unpaid labor, of fixing their problems while they belittled my own. I thought about my father's silence, his cowardice masquerading as neutrality. He was just as guilty as she was. His inaction was a form of consent. He had stood by and watched her verbally tear me down for years, his silence giving her the implicit permission she needed. He benefited from my skills just as much as she did. Yet he never once defended me, never once said, "Karen, that's enough. He's our son, and he's helping us." They had treated me as disposable. I was the emergency contact, the IT department, and the financial stopgap all rolled into one. But I was not a son. I was a function. And when my presence became more inconvenient than my function was useful, they had discarded me without a second thought. I lay on that couch one afternoon, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and the full weight of their betrayal crashed down on me. I had been carrying so much responsibility, not just for myself, but for them. I was the one who made sure their digital lives ran smoothly, the one who navigated the complexities they couldn't be bothered to learn. I wasn't a leech. I was a pillar. And they had just kicked me out from under their own roof. The rage wasn't hot and explosive like my mother's. It was cold, clear, and focused. It wasn't about revenge. Not in the petty, destructive sense. It was about severing the final tie. It was about taking back the last piece of myself they had control over. They thought they had thrown me out, but I was about to show them that I was the one who was truly leaving. And I was going to lock the door behind me. The key to my quiet exit wasn't in a slammed door or a hateful message. It was buried in the digital architecture of my family's finances. Years earlier, when I was still in college and more financially stable, my father had run into an issue paying a bill online. Frustrated and impatient, he had taken me to the bank and added me as a secondary user on their primary checking account. "You handle this stuff better than I do," he'd said at the time. "It'll be easier if you can just manage the online payments for us." It was meant to be a convenience. Another task offloaded onto me. I became the one to schedule the mortgage payments, the car insurance drafts, and the utility bills. My access was a tool for my service to them. Over the years, I had almost forgotten about it. I rarely looked at the account beyond making sure their bills were paid on time. It was their money, their life. And I was just the administrator. Now, sitting at Liam's small kitchen table with my laptop open, that access felt different. It was the final tether connecting me to them. A digital leash they had put around my neck for their own benefit. And it was time to take it off. My plan wasn't malicious. It wasn't about stealing money or causing chaos for the sake of it. It was about security. It was about detachment. It was a logical, procedural move that would have profound consequences. I logged into the online banking portal, the familiar interface loading on my screen. I navigated to the account settings, to the section for managing account users. My name was there, listed right below my father's, designated as full access. With a few clicks, I initiated the process to remove myself from the account. The system prompted me with a series of security questions. Are you sure you want to remove this user? This action cannot be undone online. I clicked confirm. A small notification popped up. Your request has been submitted. For security purposes, all account activity will be monitored, and the primary account holder will be notified. That was step 1, detaching myself. Step 2 was cleaning up. I went through the scheduled payments list, the digital footprint of my years of service, the mortgage to Wells Fargo, the car payment to Honda Financial, the Verizon bill, dozens of auto payments I had set up for them. I didn't cancel them. That would have been purely destructive. Instead, I simply flagged the ones that were linked to external accounts or third-party apps I had helped them set up years ago. The lawn service paid via PayPal, the subscription for my mother's favorite magazine, the security system that billed through a separate portal. I flagged them with a simple note. Using the bank's own security features, user-initiated security review. Please verify this payment with the primary account holder before processing. It was a standard, responsible action. If an authorized user is removed from an account, it's only logical to review the automated tasks they established. The final step was the most crucial. As a secondary user, I had the ability to report suspicious activity. I found a small, recurring charge for a digital service I didn't recognize. It was only $4.99 a month, something they had probably signed up for by accident and forgotten about. It was the perfect pretext. I clicked on the transaction and selected the option, Report Unrecognized Charge. The system's response was immediate and automated. Thank you for your report. To protect your account from potential unauthorized activity, a temporary security freeze has been placed on all outgoing electronic transfers and payments. The primary account holder, Thomas Reed, must visit a local branch or call our fraud department to verify his identity and review recent activity before the freeze can be lifted. I closed my laptop. It was done. To me, it was just routine security protocol. I was an individual who no longer had a reason to be on their account. So I removed myself and flagged potential loose ends for the owner to review. It was clean, logical, and entirely defensible. But I knew that to my parents, who barely understood how to log in, it wouldn't feel routine. It would feel like an ambush. They had used me as their digital crutch for so long that they had forgotten how to walk on their own. I had just quietly kicked that crutch out from under them. They wouldn't know what had happened or why. They would only know that their seamless, automated world had suddenly, inexplicably ground to a halt. And they would have no one to call to fix it. The silence lasted for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of peace. I started to settle into a new rhythm at Liam's apartment. I was aggressively applying for jobs, spending my days tailoring resumes and my evenings decompressing with Liam over cheap pizza and old movies. I was slowly rebuilding my life from the ground up. And for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine. I didn't check my phone for texts from my family. I didn't think about what they were doing or saying. I had walled them off. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in almost a month: Dad. A jolt went through me. A mixture of anxiety and grim satisfaction. I let it ring 3 times, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. Then I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Hello? Ethan!" His voice was a frantic bark, tight with panic and anger. "What did you do? What in the hell did you do to our bank account?" I could hear my mother shouting something unintelligible in the background. Her voice a shrill, angry hornet's nest. I stayed silent, letting him vent. "Everything is frozen," he yelled, his voice cracking. The mortgage payment bounced. The car insurance was canceled. I went to the gas station this morning and my debit card was declined. I had to pay with the cash in my pocket like some kind of teenager. The bank is telling me there's a security freeze and I have to come in with 2 forms of ID to even talk to them. This has your fingerprints all over it. I listened to his tirade. A storm of accusations and confusion. He was so used to things just working. So oblivious to the invisible labor that made it all possible. He had no idea how any of it functioned. Only that it had stopped. And in his world, when a piece of technology failed, it was my fault. He finally paused, breathing heavily into the phone. He was waiting for me to fix it. He was expecting me to sigh, tell him what to do, and magically make the problem disappear. Just like I always did. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the weight of it. For years, his silence had been a weapon against me. Now, my silence was my power. "Dad," I said finally, my voice calm and cold. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not on your account anymore." "What do you mean you're not on the account?" he sputtered. "Of course you are. You're the one who pays all the bills." "Not anymore," I replied, the words feeling clean and sharp. "I removed myself 3 weeks ago. It wasn't my account, so I took myself off it. It seemed like the responsible thing to do." There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding, trying to process what I'd said. He couldn't comprehend that I would willingly give up the privilege of managing his life. In the background, my mother's shouting became clearer. "Ask him what he did. Make him fix it." My father found his voice again, his tone shifting from anger to a desperate, wheedling plea. "Ethan, listen to me. I don't have time for this. I have bills to pay. You have to tell me how to undo this. Just fix it. Please." There it was. The magic word. Fix it. The command that had governed my life for a decade. The expectation that I would drop everything to solve a problem they had created. But the man who used to obey that command was gone. He had walked out the door with a duffel bag 3 weeks ago. I took a slow breath and looked out Liam's window at the clear blue sky. For the first time, the power dynamic had completely shifted. He was the one who was helpless. He was the one in a panic. And I was the one with all the control. I let him wait for a few more seconds. And then I delivered the line that had been forming in my mind for weeks. "I can't help you, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You should ask the Leech." And then I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked my mother's number. I set my phone down on the table and felt a wave of liberation so pure, so absolute, that it almost brought me to my knees. The engine in the basement had not only stopped running, it had just informed the captain of the ship that he was on his own. The fallout from that phone call was immediate and nuclear. My parents, denied their usual method of control and unable to force me to fix their problems, resorted to the only weapon they had left: character assassination. If they couldn't make me their servant, they would make me their villain. It started with a formal-looking letter that arrived at Liam's apartment a week later. It was from a law firm, written on thick, intimidating letterhead. My father had clearly followed through on the one thing he knew how to do: throw money at a problem. The letter was full of legal jargon, accusing me of unauthorized access, malicious interference with financial accounts, and weaponizing intimate family knowledge for personal gain. It was a masterpiece of fiction, painting me as a disgruntled hacker who had deliberately sabotaged their lives. It ended with a thinly veiled threat of legal action if I didn't cooperate in resolving the account issues immediately. I read it, and instead of feeling scared, I felt a grim sense of validation. This was who they were. They couldn't admit their own incompetence, so they had to invent a crime to pin on me. If this story is resonating with you, please consider subscribing and sharing this video. It really helps the channel grow, and I'd be so grateful for your support. I took the letter, slid it into a folder, and did nothing. The next wave of attack came from the extended family. My mother must have spent hours on the phone, spinning her tale of the ungrateful, destructive son. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, began to light up with texts and calls from numbers I hadn't blocked. Yet, my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, was the first. Her text was a single, dripping line of condemnation. "I can't believe you would do that to your parents after everything they've done for you." My cousin Ryan, Mark's age and just as arrogant, called me. I let it go to voicemail. "Dude, what is wrong with you?" his message began. "Your mom told me you drained their bank accounts and ran off. People are worried. You need to give them their money back. Drained their accounts." The lie was growing more elaborate, more damaging. They weren't just saying I froze the account. They were accusing me of theft. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, and I was being cast as the central villain in a drama of their own making. Friends of the family who I'd known my whole life were suddenly looking at me with suspicion. The small town we lived in was fertile ground for gossip, and my mother was sowing it with a vengeance. It hurt, more than I expected. I knew my parents were manipulative, but seeing them poison the entire family against me was a new level of betrayal. These were people who had watched me grow up, who had seen me patiently help my parents with their phones and computers at family gatherings. Yet, they were so quick to believe the most sensational version of the story. But I was prepared. Years of being the family's scapegoat had taught me to be meticulous. My anger on Liam's couch hadn't just been an emotional release. It had been a catalyst for action. I had spent an afternoon, before making the banking move, going through my own financial records. In a secure cloud drive, I had a folder meticulously labeled, "In case they try anything." Inside that folder was everything. There were scanned copies of cashed checks I'd given my father with, "For utilities," written in the memo line. There were screenshots of bank transfers from my account to theirs, each one dated and for a specific purpose. I had records of online bill payments I'd made on their behalf from my own debit card when they were short on cash. I even had email chains where my mother had asked me to order something for her online, followed by a transaction record showing I had paid for it. It was an airtight alibi against the Leech narrative. It was 10 years of my quiet contributions, cataloged and undeniable. The lawyer's letter, the panicked voicemails, the accusatory texts. I saved them all, adding each one to my digital fortress of evidence. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't defend myself on social media. I didn't get into shouting matches over the phone. Arguing with them would be like wrestling with a pig in the mud. I'd just get dirty, and the pig would enjoy it. My defense wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be silent, factual, and deployed only if they were foolish enough to escalate things from threats to actual legal action. Let them smear my name. Let them tell their stories. They were fighting with gossip and lies. I was armed with receipts, and I knew, with a cold certainty, that if it ever came to a real fight, the truth was on my side. Their campaign was designed to shame me back into compliance. But they didn't understand that I was no longer playing their game. I was building a new one, with new rules, on my own terms. While my family was busy orchestrating their smear campaign, I was focused on the quiet, methodical work of building a life. The rage that had fueled my departure had cooled, solidifying into a foundation of resolve. I wasn't just running from something anymore. I was building toward something. The job interview I'd been hopeful about before the blow-up came through. The mid-size logistics firm called me back for a second interview, and then a third. They weren't looking for a sales prodigy like my brother or a free-spirited artist like my sister. They were looking for someone steady, reliable, and good at solving problems. They were looking for me. When they offered me the entry-level IT support position, I accepted on the spot. The starting salary wasn't huge, but it was more than I had ever made consistently. It was a promise of stability. It was mine. My first paycheck felt like a miracle. I held it in my hands. A piece of paper that represented my own effort, my own worth, completely independent of my family. I didn't use it to pay their bills or buy their groceries. I opened my own bank account at a completely different bank than the one they used. I signed up for a secured credit card to start building my own credit history. These were small administrative tasks, but they felt like monumental acts of independence. With my first few paychecks, I saved up enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a small apartment. It was a studio on the edge of town with a galley kitchen and a view of a parking lot. The walls were thin and the carpet was a depressing shade of beige. To me, it was a palace. It was my sanctuary. I bought a mattress, a cheap desk, and a coffee maker. I furnished it slowly with secondhand items and things I found on sale. Every piece, from the mismatched coffee mugs to the slightly wobbly bookshelf, was something I had chosen, something I had paid for. The profound sense of peace that came from closing my own front door behind me at the end of the day was something I hadn't known I was missing. Next, I bought a car. It was a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a few dents and over 100,000 miles. But the engine ran smoothly. I paid for it in cash, with money I had saved meticulously. The first time I drove it to work, I felt a freedom I couldn't put into words. This car wouldn't be used to run my mother's errands or pick up my father's dry cleaning. It was for me. It would take me to my job, to the grocery store, to my new life. Perhaps the most important investment I made in myself was starting therapy. I found a counselor who specialized in family dynamics. In our weekly sessions, I began to unravel the complex knot of guilt, obligation, and anger that had defined my existence. I learned that my father's silence was a form of emotional neglect, and that my mother's criticism was a form of abuse. I learned to set boundaries. I learned that family is not an unconditional excuse for mistreatment. I learned that I had the right to walk away. Meanwhile, whispers of my family's struggles started to reach me through the grapevine. Liam heard from a mutual friend that my father's small construction business was in trouble. The freeze on his account had caused a cascade of problems. A payment to a critical vendor had bounced, causing a delay in materials for a big project. A check for the lease on his equipment had been rejected, putting him in bad standing with the rental company. The financial disruption, combined with the fact that he no longer had his live-in IT guy to manage his online invoices and client communications, was causing his business to suffer. I felt a distant, detached pang of something that wasn't quite pity. It was the logical consequence of their actions. They had thrown out a vital component of their own machine and were now shocked that it was breaking down. They had called me a leech, but it was becoming clear that they were the ones who had been feeding on my invisible support all along. My success and their decline were two sides of the same coin. A perfect, painful illustration of who had really been holding whom up. The new life I was building was quiet and orderly. I went to work, came home, paid my bills, and slowly started making new friends. I was creating a world where I felt safe and valued for who I was, not for what I could do for others. I thought I had successfully excised my family from my life. But the past has a way of reaching out when you least expect it. The call came from my sister. Sophia? It was a number I hadn't blocked, and I answered with a sense of weary curiosity. Her voice was strained, all of her usual breezy confidence gone. "Ethan, it's me." "I know," I said. She hesitated. "It's Dad." He collapsed. He was in a meeting with a client, and he just collapsed. They rushed him to the ER. It was his heart. The doctors are saying it was a stress-induced event. My own heart gave a painful thud in my chest. For a moment, all the anger and resentment was washed away by a primal fear. He was still my father. "Is he okay?" I asked. my voice tight. He's stable now, she said. But he's a mess. Mom is losing it. The business. It's not good. Ethan. Everything is falling apart. There was an unspoken accusation in her tone. A hint that this was somehow my fault. The old narrative was trying to reassert itself. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, choosing my words carefully. Are you going to come to the hospital? She asked. I thought about it. I imagined walking into that sterile, brightly lit room. I imagined my mother's face, contorted with grief and rage, immediately blaming me for his condition. I imagined my brother Mark standing there, ready with a smug, cutting remark. I imagined my father, weak and vulnerable in a hospital bed. The situation instantly becoming another tool for emotional manipulation. Going there wouldn't be an act of love or support. It would be walking back into the fire. My therapist's voice echoed in my head. You can feel compassion without sacrificing your boundaries. No. Sophia? I said, my voice firm but not unkind. I don't think that's a good idea for anyone. She was silent for a moment, then sighed. I figured you'd say that. We hung up shortly after. But I couldn't just do nothing. He was my father. The man who had taught me how to ride a bike and how to bait a fishing hook. Long before he had retreated behind his newspaper. I went online and ordered a bouquet of flowers to be sent to his hospital room. I chose white lilies. They were a symbol of peace and rebirth. But they also held a private meaning. When I had graduated from college, the only person who had sent me a gift was my father. It was a small, potted white lily left on my desk with a simple, unsigned card that just said, "Congratulations." It was one of the few times he had acknowledged an achievement of mine. A rare moment of silent approval. Sending them back to him now felt like closing a circle. It was an acknowledgement of our shared history, the good and the bad. It was a message that said, I remember you, but from a distance. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unblocked number. It was him. I got the flowers. They're beautiful. Thank you. I didn't reply. Another text arrived the next day. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what happened. Can we talk? This was different. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a request. After weeks of careful consideration and a long session with my therapist, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a quiet diner halfway between my apartment and their house. He looked older, more tired than I had ever seen him. The arrogant shield he used to carry was gone. He fumbled with his coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. I was a coward, he said finally, his voice thick with shame. For years, I just sat there. I let your mother's bitterness run the show because it was easier than fighting her. It was easier to let her make you the target than to stand up and deal with her anger myself. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a pain I'd never seen before. You were never the leech, son. You were the glue. You held everything together. You managed the things I didn't know how to manage. the things she refused to learn. We depended on you for everything, and we paid you back with contempt. When you left, everything started to fall apart. Not just the bank account. Everything. I listened, not saying a word. This was the conversation I had needed to have for 15 years. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, shaking his head. "And I'm not asking you to come back. I needed you to know that I see it now. I see you." It wasn't a magical fix. It didn't erase years of neglect. But it was the truth. It was a crack in the wall of denial. A glimmer of light in a lifetime of shadows. For the first time, my father had chosen me over his silence. That conversation at the diner wasn't an end. But it was a new beginning. My relationship with my father began a slow, careful process of being rebuilt. Not on the rotten foundation of the past, but on the new, fragile ground of honesty. We maintain limited contact. We meet for coffee once a month. He tells me about his recovery and his attempts to get the business back on its feet. He talks about learning to manage his own finances and setting up his own online accounts. He's learning to walk on his own. I listen, and I offer encouragement, but I no longer offer to do it for him. My role as the fixer is permanently retired. My mother is a different story. A few weeks after my father was discharged from the hospital, she started sending me texts. They were never apologies. They were masterclasses in deflection and blame shifting. "I hope you're happy with the stress you've caused your father. Your family has been through enough. It's time for you to stop being selfish. I'm your mother. You owe me your respect no matter what." I read the first few. Then I started deleting them without reading. I refused to engage in a battle I can't win. Her approval was something I once craved with a desperate, childish hunger. Now I understand that it was a poisoned well. I will never get the apology I deserve, and I have made my peace with that. My healing doesn't depend on her admission of guilt. It depends on my refusal to let her hurt me anymore. I am happy. It's a quiet, steady kind of happiness that I've built for myself. My apartment feels like a home. My job challenges me. My friendships are built on mutual respect. I'm paying off my student loans, building my savings. And for the first time, I can look toward the future without a sense of dread. I am defined by my own actions and my own character, not by the distorted reflection I saw in my mother's eyes. They threw me out thinking they were casting off a burden. They didn't realize they were setting me free. They wanted to break me, but they only showed me how strong I was. I wasn't a leech. I was the glue. And when they threw me out, I finally learned I was strong enough to hold myself together. If you've ever been unfairly branded as the problem by the very people who were supposed to support you, share your story in the comments below. Your voice deserves to be heard. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, survival, and